Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who picked Damian Maia to defeat Nate Marquardt. He's too good on the ground. What's Nate gonna do? Punch him in the face? Yeah, good luck with that, jerk off. Anyway, I'm here to talk about UFC Mexico, otherwise known as UFC Fight Night on ESPN 64. Moreno versus Erceg. As always, this program is sponsored by Locatelli's Pecorino Romano cheese. This shit is so good, I put it on fucking Pop-Tarts. All over the bathrobe. I don't even give a fuck. Okay, opening up the card, we have Gabriel Miranda versus Jamal Emmers. My prediction for this fight is Emmers wins, and I've got him winning by TKO. And I'll go with it happening in round 2. And the basis for the prediction is Jamal Emmers is a well-rounded MMA fighter, and Gabriel Miranda is not. He is a one-trick pony. He's a submission monster. 16 subs in his 17 victories. He is that potently dangerous. And we've seen it in the UFC with him going through Shane Young in a minute. But the rest of it, of what we've seen in the UFC, is him being shut down. And I think Jamal Emmers can keep Gabriel Miranda off of him. Jamal Emmers, I expect to be the better wrestler and the better striker as well. I don't think he's going to be the better striker or winning that type of fight early on. I think he's just going to be trying to prolong this fight. But I think Jamal Emmers accelerates with his striking and takes over the fight once he gets Gabriel Miranda tired and a little beaten up. And I think he can reduce him to the guard pulling and butt scooting and flip-flopping and all that horse shit and suck some of the life out of him and put him away. And that is a prediction. I also think if it should go the distance somehow, I would expect Jamal Emmers to win that fight. I'd have him as a 10-1 favorite to win the decision, 20-1. I think positionally he just takes over. And unless he gets taken down or ends up letting his legs get laced up and he starts getting threatened with a real grappling fight, I think Jamal Emmers will be sitting comfortably until the fight ends, which I have him winning again, turning it up and getting a TKO. Jamal Emmers, he's been cracked a few times. He's been TKO'd 3 times. Knocked out in his last fight against Nate Landwehr. Knocked out against Julian Erosa on the Contender Series way back when. Season 2, I believe. And his other loss by TKO was a 5th-round stoppage to Thiago Moises. It wasn't his chin failing him. It was just him being exhausted and beaten down. He's also been submitted twice, which is much more relevant to this fight. Ray Trujillo did get him out of there with a triangle choke in round 2. That guy Ray Trujillo is a really battle-tested, grizzled journeyman, and that's probably his best victory, certainly one of them. Triangle in round 2. But that was 10 years ago. The only guy to tap him out in the last 10 years was Pat Sabatini 4 years ago with a heel hook. After Jamal Emmers caught him cold and knocked him down, and then wasn't able to close the show, and a minute later ended up getting tapped. Pat Sabatini's a fucking monster. But Gabriel Miranda's a monster as well. And I think that fight was a good learning experience for Jamal in this fight. He's had his opponent on the ropes or on the ground and smelt blood in the water and saw victory in sight. And he ended up getting his leg laced and getting tapped out. And against Gabriel Miranda, I'm sure he's been thinking about that fight. I'm sure he remembers that fight. And of course, it took him out of a commission for a year. But I think he's going to be playing it safe here. Even in dicey moments like that for Miranda, Jamal Emmers is going to know, hey, this guy's got one chance of winning, and that's lacing up a limb of mine or grabbing my neck. And he's going to keep him off of him and I think prolong this fight and put him away. Gabriel Miranda, he's got a record of 17-7. 16 submission wins. Again, he is a fucking monster. But on the flip side, at the UFC level, he's been put away a few times. He was knocked out against Morgan Charrier in his last fight in round 2. And he was knocked out against Benoit Saint-Denis. Both finishes were within the first 30 seconds of round 2, which just shows it's like a thing for him getting into round 2. He's been into round 2 a few times, but as is the case with a lot of guys with padded records, most of his victories are in round one. He's a round one submission monster. That's pretty much the story on paper, and I think it's the story in the octagon. And yeah, I think against Jamal Emmers, he'll never be winning the fight unless he's got a submission locked up. He's not going to be even scoring any points. And I think Jamal will win the positional battle. And I don't think Gabriel Miranda is going to be able to fight down the stretch with a guy as well-rounded as Jamal Emmers. Jamal will have too big of an advantage on the feet. I think Gabriel could try to take it to Jamal on the feet. I think he probably will. Gabriel's got something on the feet. But if he doesn't go through Jamal's chin very early, pretty much he's going to have nothing on the feet. I do think Jamal will be the much cleaner striker and the much cleaner wrestler, and I think he's going to win this fight. So I bet on Jamal Emmers already. The odds have widened a little bit, and maybe I'll look to play the props and whatever else. And Gabriel Miranda, look, his path to victory is submission, but the odds may not be worth it as a hedge. I have to wait to see what the props even look like. But no doubt that's his primary path to victory. Second path to victory is a Hail Mary knockout. But a decision I would consider impossible unless the judge. Up next, we have Christian Rodriguez versus Melk Costa. My prediction for this fight is Melk wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by decision. And the basis for the prediction is he is a really well-rounded fighter who's got a wealth of experience, and there's no major hole in his game where I think Christian can find something and just take over the fight. And speaking of which, Christian Rodriguez is an excellent round 3 fighter. He does take over most fights because he just keeps accelerating and he's got excellent cardio. But I think Melk Costa is also really good down the stretch, even though he's lost down the stretch a few times. But that comes with the territory. If you have a deep record, he's got a wealth of experience compared to Christian, and some of it is losses. But I still think Melk Costa is not somebody who's likely to fall apart, not somebody who's going to make it easy for Christian anywhere. And on top of being a technical match for him, he is the guy that's been fighting longer at featherweight. He's 3 inches taller, even though the reach is negligible. I do think Melk Costa, mixing it up, would have the bigger body to hang on top of Christian Rodriguez. I think either guy could mix it up here, to be honest. But I'm going to go with Melk winning by decision. And even though Melk's been putting a lot of guys away by submission lately, decision is the pick because I think Christian Rodriguez is still going to be really tough to get out of there in the future, by knockout or by submission. I know Julian Erosa got him out of there, and now 1 out of his 2 losses is a finish. But I think in general, the majority of CeeRod's losses will be decisions. But yeah, Julian Erosa did tap him. Julian Erosa is one of the most dangerous submission artists in the division, and his guillotine is his best weapon. That is one of the best singular submissions in the division. And I don't think there's any shame in getting tapped by it for CeeRod. But yeah, I think it's going to be tough to get him out of there moving forward. But yeah, Melk Costa, like I said, he's got losses every which way, just like his wins. And yeah, he has been finished. He was TKO'd, knocked out a few times, and he was also submitted a few times. We saw him get knocked out in his last loss against Steve Garcia in round 2. Steve Garcia is a fucking dangerous monster, and he's got dangerous, monstrous elbows. And right now he's on a, 5-6 fight winning streak, whatever it is. And yeah, he's surging. So no shame there. And he also got submitted against Thiago Moises in round 2 as well, which Thiago's a big fucking strong monster, grappling monster. And I do think Melk took that fight on short notice. So those are forgivable losses. But even before that, he was finished a few other times as well. Against Rafael Barbosa, tapped him in round 3. That guy's a good fighter. Arm triangle choked him in round 3. And there was another fight. He beat this guy, Jonas Dos Santos, by unanimous decision. That might be a submission loss. I don't know. I've seen Melk getting choked unconscious with an anaconda choke. It's on YouTube. And the description says it's to that guy. It certainly looks like it, even though you can't really tell much. But regardless, it might have been another submission loss 9 years ago for Melk. Just know that I know that and I wonder about it. But regardless, it says decision victory. So, decision victory, I guess. But yeah, Melk's been finished a few times throughout the years, but and despite being finished in his 2 UFC losses, I think it's going to be tough for Christian Rodriguez to finish him. I'd go with Christian getting a submission before a knockout. Christian's really good everywhere, but he's not the most physically imposing guy, again, and that comes with the territory when you're moving up in weight. So yeah, this one really could be interesting. I think CeeRod is probably the better man in round 3, but not by such a big margin. But the guy just doesn't stop fighting. He's proven it in every fight so far in the UFC in which he's been to round 3. And I think this one will be interesting and close. Even if it does go to a decision like I'm picking, I think it'll be really close. But I'm going to go with Melk Costa. I think Melk can match Christian on the feet and mix it up and get some takedowns as well. So yeah, Melk by decision, and not a lot of confidence in the prediction. Although you don't need a lot of confidence to place a bet. Up next, we have Vince Morales versus Raul Rosas Jr. Another quick turnaround for Vince Morales, just like Melk Costa. But my prediction for this fight is Raul Rosas Jr. wins. I've got Raul Rosas Jr. winning by decision. I think he's going to be the bully in there, the better wrestler. And I think Vince Morales will give him a good taste of danger on the feet and perhaps even on the ground, just to force Raul Rosas Jr. to slow down. And I think he's going to slow this fight down and win another decision. Raul Rosas Jr., he's shown some great traits, aside from that loss to Christian Rodriguez. But I didn't think he was so dominant against Aoriqileng, but I still thought he cleanly won the fight. And that was a good look for him, because most of his victories have been dominance, pure dominance. Even his decision victory over Mando Gutierrez, his other decision victory. It was really dominant for him. And that loss to CeeRod was a fight in which he was outlasted. He was figured out, neutralized, that wrestling was nowhere to be found after the first 5 or 6 minutes. And then he was surviving for the second half of that fight. He did survive. He didn't let CeeRod overwhelm him, but he ran out of gas. And that's definitely not something that's going to haunt him forever, because he was, 18 years old or something when he lost that fight. Now he's still only 20 years old. But yeah, it was a good lesson that needed to be learned. And I think Raul Rosas Jr. managed himself well against Aoriqileng. And I expect him to manage himself well against Vince Morales. If he has trouble anywhere, on the feet, on the ground, or in the wrestling department, having trouble getting the fight to the ground. But I do think he does win the battle there. I think Raul Rosas Jr. will overcome any hiccups and any roadblocks, and he will win another comfortable decision victory. But again, I think it's going to be another tough test for him. Vince Morales is a well-rounded guy. He's a dangerous guy, and he's no stranger to fighting long fights himself. But where I thought he could have taken over, like in his last fight against Elijah Smith, Elijah Smith was able to battle back after a hard round 2 and reclaim the victory in round 3, just like Rosas did against Aoriqileng. And that's pretty much the fight I expect here. But Vince Morales, again, I have to mention it, just like I did a few weeks ago when he fought last, he's a better submission artist these days. He got some really nice, valuable submissions and overall really valuable victories between UFC stints. But I think he's a guy that can make Raul Rosas Jr. pay on the feet or on the ground in any round. Vince Morales was winning those submissions down the stretch, rounds 2 and 3. And I think Raul Rosas Jr. Really has to watch out throughout this whole fight with Vince. But I think he will. Again, I think he learned as much as he could learn from that Christian Rodriguez loss. I think he manages himself well. And I think he will scratch and claw for a decision victory here. He'll be able to out-wrestle Vince Morales, survive any hiccups, and win this fight on points. So yeah, the pick is Raul Rosas Jr. And I've only placed one bet on him in a parlay, but he's too big of a favorite for me to really commit to with a straight bet on him. But he is definitely my pick to win. And as for Vince Morales winning, I do think a finish would be much more likely than a decision, but that's not something that I could go reaching for anyway, because look at his one loss, Raul Rosas Jr. He did survive against CeeRod. So, yeah, right now, the pick is Raul Rosas Jr., and there's no real bets on it. Up next, we have Rafa Garcia versus Vince Pichel, who is from hell. My prediction here is Garcia wins. I'm going to go with him winning by decision. Having said that, all the value is on Vince Pichel, who is in fact 42 years old. But yeah, he's a gigantic favorite here. Initially, I was excited to bet on Rafa Garcia, thinking the odds would be a lot closer, but turns out they're pretty fucking wide. Rafa Garcia is my pick to win, though. I do think he's going to out hustle Vince Pichel. I think Garcia is also really, really tough, where should anything go wrong, he'd be able to survive. But yeah, over the course of 15 minutes, I have no doubt he does more work. Vince Pichel is going to be slower than him. I do think Vince Pichel is still a tough striker to just conquer. I mean, he stood up to Ismail Bonfim, who is 10 times more dangerous than Rafa Garcia in his last fight, way back when he was 41. And I do think he's still really fucking tough, Vince Pichel. And he's crafty too. He's been able to get on top of guys and make that his path to victory. But here, I think Rafa Garcia is going to be too fast, where he's going to be the one dictating things on the feet. And I think he's going to be too dominant in the wrestling department, ripping Vince Pichel to the mat. I don't know if he's going to look like a 20-1 favorite or whatever he looks like, but or whatever he's supposed to look like. But he's definitely the younger, healthier athlete. And there's no major knock against him. Just like with Vince Pichel, sure, he's been conquered by submission and TKO'd even technically with a slam. But there's no major weakness to Vince Pichel. Same goes for Garcia. His TKO loss to Grant Dawson was pretty much like the TKO loss to the submission loss against Gregor Gillespie for Vince Pichel. Just up against a fucking monster, a grappling monster. But yeah, I think both guys are still tough, but one guy's tough and 30 years old, and I think he's a lot faster. And of course, should the fight be close, which if Vince Pichel was to win the fight, I think it would be close. But should that be the case, the crowd would probably come down on the side of Rafa Garcia. What do you think? So yeah, Rafa Garcia is the pick. I'd love to see Vince Pichel land timely counters and just stifle the volume of Rafa Garcia and maybe even try to get on top of him to slow him down. But I don't think he can do it for the better part of 15 minutes. Yeah, Garcia has to be the pick, and decision has to be the method of victory. Next up, we have Edgar Chairez versus CJ Vergara. My prediction for this fight is Chairez wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by submission. I think Edgar Chairez is the better fighter, technically, everywhere, compared to CJ Vergara. I think he's got a lot more to offer on the ground and on the feet, too. CJ Vergara is really tough, despite his recent knockout loss. But Chairez is also tough, and I also think he's faster and strikes better. I like his hands, but I really like those lead calf kicks. I think he's going to be chopping up the lead calf kick of CJ Vergara. And when I say lead calf kick, I mean rear calf kick, the power kick, but on the lead leg of CJ Vergara. And I do think Edgar Chairez will be getting the better of CJ on the outside. Of course, should CJ Vergara find his way to the inside, he's really rough and tough, and he's got excellent knees to the body. I have to point that out and say that's probably his best weapon. It's produced some great results for him so far, CJ Vergara. And yeah, he's got the toughness to back him up and get him inside usually. But he was knocked out for the first time in his last fight against Ramazan Bektemirov, who's a really dangerous guy, despite how he looked against Charles Johnson. But yeah, he was able to go through CJ, hurt him a few times, and that body, speaking of body shots, he was able to go through CJ, hurting him there. But I still think CJ is going to be really tough to get out on the feet in general. And on the ground, maybe not so much. Both guys have actually been submitted twice. But the difference is CJ Vergara doesn't even have one submission victory, as opposed to Chires, who's got 7 in his 11 victories. So yeah, Chires, despite being tapped twice, he's the bigger threat there, and he gets the first submission. CJ Vergara, he was tapped by Tatsuro Taira, no shame there. And then he got choked with a rear naked choke 7 or 8 years ago in a minute. Whatever happened there. But yeah, Taira is a monster. There's no shame in that being your one submission loss, but it is still that's a loss. He lost to Taira and it was by submission, and Tatsuro Taira fought Edgar Chires, and Chires almost tapped him. Even though I thought Taira won the fight, Edgar Chires made that really fucking close and put him in a lot of fucking danger when he least expected it, mounting him with a guillotine. And I think Edgar Chires, that's just another example of him being on another level as far as submission grappling goes on the ground. Chires, yeah, he's really fucking tough. He was knocked silly, I want to say, against Joshua Van in his last fight, but he stood tall, came back with a back fist, and actually rocked Van, and then maybe made a bad decision running into a takedown or some sort of collision, and ended up conceding the round with top position and eventually losing a decision there. But yeah, Chires, his last few losses have been by decision to Taira, which I mentioned, and then to Joshua Van and Clayton Carpenter in his other 2 losses there. And they were both fights in which he was doing well early and then lost rounds 2 and 3. So there could be something there. And of course, like I said, he was submitted twice. They were both in his first 3 losses. He got triangle choked in his first loss in round 2 against this guy, Axel Oksuna. And he was put into a guillotine choke with 20 seconds left in round 5 against Jesus Santos Aguilar, who is a guillotine monster. So yeah, it's happened with Chires before, but like I said, on the flip side, his opponent here doesn't have a submission victory. So he's safer in that regard. I think Chires has to stop him, keep himself from collapsing cardio-wise, and also make this a longer fight on the feet. Stop CJ from getting in his face, because CJ, up until his last fight, he's been pretty good at playing the Terminator. Go ask Clayton Rodriguez. Really fucking close fight. But yeah, I'm going with Chires. If worse comes to worse and it's a close fight, he's got the crowd to back him up. But I don't think he's going to be winning his first decision here. I think he's going to get it done by submission. That is the pick, Edgar Chires. Next up, we have Simon Oliveira making his return to the UFC against David Martinez. David. My prediction for this fight is Martinez wins, and I'll go with him winning by decision. Most of his wins do come by knockout. And Simon Oliveira's coming off of a 2-year layoff, and his last loss was by knockout. So I could be wrong about the decision part if David is to win, but I still think he'll win by decision. I think David Martinez looks really good as a fighter. He's got an 11-1 record. His one loss is by split decision to this guy, Gianni Di Chiara Vasquez. I've seen the highlights of it, a few minutes of the fight, but not the whole thing. Still, it was, I think, mostly contested on the feet, and it was a razor-thin fight. And it didn't look like he was gasping for air or anything, even though I don't really know what I was watching. But still, I don't think it's a major stain on his record, and I know, even without having seen the whole thing, that he wasn't dominated. And I also think I know from having seen the highlights that he wasn't beaten on the ground either. Not thoroughly. But yeah, he's got an 11-1 record. His 11 wins include 9 knockouts and 2 decisions. He got a decision in his last victory over the Contender Series over Xavier Franklin. I thought he was the better man throughout the course of that fight. And especially in the end, I thought he was really working him with some nice kicks. And speaking of working kicks down the stretch, his fight before that, he got a spinning wheel kick knockout over Jose Zarus. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I know the guy's name, and he is a good fighter. And he got him out of there with a round 4 spinning wheel kick, which was excellent, showing that danger and that athleticism down the stretch. Not to mention the energy in the first place to even do that shit. But yeah, he got another round 4 victory before that over Axel Asuna, who I mentioned in a previous segment here. He beat Edgar Chairez by triangle choke. Well, that same guy, David Martinez, took out in round 4 as well. Beat him up on the ground, actually. He got clipped with a head kick in round 3, too, which was a dicey moment for him. But he survived, weathered the storm, and then went back to controlling the fight. Stuffed a few takedowns, bowled him over, and pounded him out for a finish. So yeah, he's been able to win down the stretch, these round 4 victories. A few fights before that, he knocked out Francisco Rivera in round 2. I don't know if you remember him, but he was a UFC savage 10 years ago or so. But yeah, he's definitely got some good wins in his 11 victories, and I like the way he looks. And based on what I saw in the 3-minute video, I like the way he looked in defeat. So I'm going with David Martinez here. I think he's going to have too much for Simon Oliveira on the feet. I think he's going to be the much cleaner striker. And I think he's going to be fighting as an anti-grappler here in this fight, looking to shut down the attacks from Simon Oliveira, who is definitely the grappler in this matchup, and specifically has a guillotine choke that seems monstrous. He's got 11 submissions, which is impressive on its own for his 18 victories. But in those 11 submissions, he's probably got like 8 or 9 guillotines, maybe 8. I don't know, but it's definitely his best move, and that's always the most available opportunistic submission. So Martinez has to mind his P's and Q's. But Simon Oliveira, he's been defeated a few times. He's been defeated 5 times. They're all spread out throughout his career every few years, but in the last few years, he was defeated twice in consecutive fights against Tony Gravely and Daniel Marcos. Marcos was able to go through him and get him out of there with body shots, knees, and punches, and beat him down in round 2. And Tony Gravely was able to shut him down, take him down, shuck off submissions, and win the wrestler decision. I'm sure that can and will happen again if he fights long enough, but I don't think that's going to happen here. Davi Martinez is not going to be looking to get in tight, let alone on top of Simon Oliveira. I think he's going to be keeping this one at distance, and he's going to be the one on the back foot at first anyway, trying to shut down the attacks and advances of Simon Oliveira. Simon Oliveira, he's got a long layoff here, 2 years. I don't know what he's had going on, but he's still only 33 years old, which is a good look. He's still theoretically in his prime or close enough, but there's no trusting him. He's coming off of 2 losses, was finished for the first time, and now he's 33 years old, which won't be long before he's middle-aged, like I am. But yeah, his last victory was a good victory over Jose Alde, the Mexican Jose Aldo, and he beat him by split decision on the Contender Series. Really had to work for it, but I thought he did enough work, and I thought he out-hustled him for a victory. Was able to get on top largely in round 3 and make that the story of the round in the fight. But yeah, before that, mostly submission victories for him, and almost all of which are guillotine chokes. I love a specialist. I love a Cody McKenzie as much as the next guy. Look him up. He was fucking fascinating. But here I do think David Martinez and his coaches have probably been looking to shut down guillotines from every possible way, every possible angle. And I think here on the feet, he's just going to have too much for Simon down the stretch. And when I say too much, I don't mean he's going to finish him. I mean Simon Oliveira is going to grow desperate and realize he can't hang with him. And yeah, I've got David Martinez winning. I've got his striking, beating the grappler and the grappling of Simon Oliveira. And I'm just stupid enough to take it happening by decision. Next up, we have Jose Medina versus Ateba Abega Gautier. My prediction for this fight is Gautier wins, and I've got him winning by decision. And the basis for the prediction is he moves really well, he's really dangerous, but Jose Medina is really fucking tough. Uh, a finish certainly wouldn't surprise me because Gautier seems to have a lot of promise. But I think Jose Medina can take it better than most. And I think he's going to need to make it out of this fight and even to win this fight. He's going to need to take it and get in the face of Gautier and try to make this a grimy fight, maybe take him down and tire him out. Speaking of which, Gautier has lost once, and it was by split decision, and it was due to him getting tired. That's the only reason he lost that fight. Although, to be honest, he still easily could have won that fight. I'm saying, he could have won the decision there. But he did lose that second fight he had to Glenn Williams, split decision. And I do think, even without having seen it, just based on how he looks, that the way to beat him is to tire him out. He's got to feed those muscles, and he's got a lot of fucking muscle. He is 22 years old, I think. Just like his fellow Cameroonian, Francis Ngannou, he might be like 32, 10 years older than he looks. But yeah, 22 years old, and he's definitely the faster guy compared to Jose Medina. And he also hits really fucking hard. He's got 5 finishes in his 6 victories, almost all of them in round 1, but he got a nice one in round 2, at the end of round 2 against Naito, the guy that he fought on the Contender Series. And it wasn't an easy round 1 either. Although, I don't know what happened there. I got swallowed up by some blue shit. But here I am. And yeah, I think Gautier, it was a good look for him to win like that in round 2 against Naito. But it's still not great to lose round 1 that way. And I think there's just a lot of questions with this guy. There's no telling if he has good or bad cardio. Like I said, you could attribute his one loss to cardio, but he didn't totally fall apart, and I'm sure he learned from it, with that being his second fight altogether. And I think he's just a guy that's got to be pushed to the point of exhaustion. He didn't really exert himself even in the round 1 loss to Naito when Naito was on top of him. It wasn't like it really taxed his cardio so much. I want to see if Jose Medina or anybody can drag him into a competitive fight, what he's going to look like. But yeah, in Jose Medina, the first step in that equation is him being a reliable punching bag, which he is. He can take it. And he's been a punching bag and a wrestling bag and whatever at the UFC level. But taking it's not enough. Again, you have to press this guy and tax his cardio, not just with one lucky body shot, although that'll certainly do the trick sometimes. But you got to fucking get in his face and try to mix it up, take him to the ground. Jose Medina, he's really not so great in any one realm, but he can do it all. The guy can wrestle and grapple, and he can strike. I think if he gets Gautier tired, that'll really open up his chances on the feet. I think in rounds 2 and 3, he stands a better chance on the feet. Although, again, Gautier's only got 7 fights. And having only seen him lose once, I don't know, he may have a button on his chin that just hasn't been pushed yet. But I still think it's going to be tough for Medina to catch him. I think he is going to be playing catch up in general early on, but he's got to press Gautier. And his last victory, even though it's not over the best fighter, it is a 5-round decision, and it's a split decision. It was a close fight, grimy fucking fight, but it was everywhere. Stand up on the ground. It was give and take. Both guys having their moments. And in the end, it was pretty lethargic and slow and whatever. But Jose Medina still won a 5-round decision. That's the last fight he won. And I think mixing it up and getting on top of Gautier when he's a little tired, or just getting him tired in the first place, would open up a whole world of opportunities for Jose Medina. So I am betting on Jose Medina. I do think certainly you could bet on props, throw sprinkles on props for him winning down the stretch. I'll waste a few nickels and dimes on that probably. But I'll also be excited to look at this fight after round one, where I think Gautier will be up by 1 or 2 points, maybe 3. I don't know. And Jose Medina won't be looking too pretty, but, of all the traits you need to turn things around, I know he's got one of them in spades, and that's durability. He was taken out once, and it was by submission in his first loss ever 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago. And it was to a guy he had beaten, by the way, by TKO. But still, I think submission is unlikely, really, for either guy. Although, again, with Gautier, he's only got 7 fights. Who knows? There could be a whole world of offense there for him. But I think Jose Medina, all he's got to do is survive round one, and it makes this fight very interesting. So the pick is Gautier. And the bets probably won't be on Gautier. I'll wait for the props, see what his decision prop looks like. Because I do think if Gautier, the fight I envision him winning, is doing well early, tasting some danger, and slowing things down. Slowing things down before he slows down. Because his athleticism won't be there in rounds 2 and 3 like it was in round 1. I'm sure he's in a lot better shape than he was when he lost that first fight. But athleticism is athleticism. It's going to fall off, and I do think Gautier, Medina is reliably tough. So no matter what, it gets interesting, and things change after round 1. But I still think Gautier will be able to pull out a victory. So that's the pick. Next up, we have Loopy Godinez versus Julia Polastri. My prediction for this fight is Loopy Godinez wins, and I've got her winning by decision. I think Loopy is going to work hard for this fight, but I think it'll be a tight decision that goes her way because she's the better wrestler. And in general, she wins that battle and gets more points on the ground. Even though I think overall on the ground, Julia Palastri's probably the better submission grappler, probably better overall. But the girl with her ass in the air racks up more points, and that's the wrestler. And on the feet, I think Loopy Godinez is the more aggressive fighter and also gets half a point on the judges' scorecards for fucking aggression. And she puts together some aggressive boxing combinations. And I think she has the slightest of edges on the feet. Even though Palastri's really comfortable on the back foot and she's no slouch as a striker at all. But I think Loopy's just got a slight edge overall, and I've got her winning by decision. Neither girl has ever been finished as a professional. Loopy Godinez has been tapped before, but as an amateur. But I'd be surprised if either girl got a finish, unless it's a fucking doctor stoppage due to a cut. I'll never be surprised when that kills a bet. But I do think this one is very likely to go the distance, and I think it's very likely to be a close fight. And of course, in the event of emergency, just look to the crowd for a slight advantage, and the crowd is going to be firmly behind Loopy Godinez. I'm not always heavy on the crowd, but I do think this fight is destined to go the distance and likely to be close. So, might play a role there. But yeah, they are going to be firmly behind Loopy Godinez. But even if they weren't and these girls were fighting in the apex, I'd give a slight edge to Loopy for all the reasons I listed technically. And her last victory, split decision, but still a tight decision over Tabitha Ricci. I think is a good fight to look to for success she can have. That was a wild fight too, with each girl getting dropped. Not that you didn't know it, but Loopy Godinez is very fucking tough if put to the test. And I think, again, against Julia Polastri, she'll be able to corral her into the cage and hopefully just be the bully and set up some takedowns. So yeah, Loopy Godinez by decision is the pick. Julia Polastri, she's got 4 losses, all by decision. All to good fighters spread out throughout her career. But in the last 7 years or so, her only 2 losses are to Jasmine Jasdavicius and Josephine Knudsen, who should still be in the UFC, but she left for whatever reason. I think she asked to leave. But regardless, Jasmine Jasdavicius, who beat her on the Contender Series, is surging right now, and Julia Polastri gave her one hell of a fight. It was deceptively close, even though Jasmine definitely won the decision pretty cleanly. Julia gave her hell, and I think she's going to give Loopy hell, but Loopy, she's really tough to get out of there, and I give her the wrestling advantage. So that's the story of my prediction and bet. I have bet on Loopy because I'm a degenerate who can't wait, and I think the odds are going to turn to shit if I don't bet on her. But now that I have, I regret it, and I wish the props were available, and even the over-under, so I could assess the best way to bet on Loopy winning by decision. Whatever. Next up, we have Drew Dober versus Manuel Torres. My prediction for this fight is Dober wins, and I've got him winning by knockout. And the basis for the prediction is I think he's still really fucking dangerous, really fucking tough, and he also moves well. But yeah, I think Drew is going to be a problem for Manuel Torres. Torres, of course, on paper is going to be a big problem in round one. He's got 15 victories, 14 of them are round one finishes, 7 by knockout, 7 by submission. And we've seen this danger in the UFC. He got a nice submission victory over Chris Duncan in his last win. Chris Duncan, who won by submission himself over Jordan Vucenic 36 hours ago. And I got that one wrong. But yeah, for this one, I'm going with Drew Dober. And if I get this one wrong, I think it is a round one finish for Manuel Torres. I would go with knockout over submission, but if you told me either guy was getting submitted, I'd pick it to be Drew Dober, tapping out. But yeah, look, Manuel Torres, he's been beaten 3 times, twice by submission and once by knockout. All 3 losses are in round one. So it's not like he's guaranteed to lose once it goes past round one. Cardio isn't a definitive weakness of his. But it's something I would expect to be a weakness in a matchup against Drew Dober, who's had countless wars in the UFC and fights that came and went, but, were really hard-fought battles. And at a very high level, too, obviously. So I think Drew would be the better man down the stretch, but Drew is only likely to plug into one of his losses, and that's the knockout loss in his last fight to Ignacio Bahamondes. Ignacio was longer and taller, obviously, than Manuel Torres, was frustrating him on the outside, and then clipped him with a big punch, and that was it. He was able to put him away. His other 2 losses are by round one, heel hook and knee bar, I believe. Leg locks, both within a minute. That is not a path to victory for Drew Dober, but could be a weakness of Manuel Torres' moving forward. Who knows? But yeah, I do think Manuel Torres, despite only having been knocked out once, he leaves himself open, and he's been clipped in a few of these fights. Chris Duncan, Nicholas Mota, and there was at least one moment in each of those fights where I was like, and he was stunned. And I think with Drew Dober moving the way he moves really well, and he also brings more firepower than these guys. I think he's going to be a problem for Manuel Torres. Plus, he's got all that durability to back him up. So I think Drew's able to stand up to the danger of Manuel Torres, as long as he doesn't eat one of those step-in elbows. And I think he's athletic enough and physical enough to be a problem to shut down any conventional grappling attempts from Manuel Torres. And in the end, Drew Dober puts him away with a knockout. I would think it would happen in the first round and a half, just so I can justify having bet on that already. But even if it doesn't, I would be surprised if this fight went the distance, no matter who won the fight. I think Drew Dober winning by knockout, the chances of that go up drastically if this fight gets out of round one. So yeah, Dober is the pick. I've got him winning by knockout, and I'll go with round 2, just to kind of be vague about that whole. Next up, we have Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Kevin Borjas. My prediction for this fight is Ronaldo Rodriguez wins. And I'm going to go with him winning by round 3 submission, because that sounds really fucking dramatic. But yeah, submission is the pick. I do think Ronaldo Rodriguez is the overall better fighter, but I do think Kevin Borjas is better than him on the feet. and I think he's going to be a problem, especially early on. But Ronaldo Rodriguez, he's a resourceful fighter. He's really durable. And, of course, he's got the hometown crowd and all that. And I do think, he's not going to need the crowd to produce a submission victory. I think he's the better man down the stretch. And the prediction is he wins by submission. Borjas, he's got a record of 9-3. He's got 8 TKOs and just 1 decision victory, although it was a good decision on the Contender Series over Victor Diaz. His 3 losses come 1-1-1. He was knocked out in his last fight against Alessandro Costa in round 2. And he was beaten by decision in the fight before that against Joshua Van. Joshua Van did the usual Joshua Van thing and tamed him and beat him down the stretch. And he lost by submission to this guy, Renzo Mendez. Or is it Renzo? But yeah, he got him out of there with a rear naked choke in round 2. And that was after Kevin Borjas was all over him and wasn't able to close the show. And then Kevin Borjas got clipped. And that easily could have been a TKO loss, but it ended up being a submission loss, which I guess swayed my prediction to a submission loss here, where I'm picking Ronaldo Rodriguez. But yeah, I think Kevin is going to be a tough matchup. I know he's going to be bringing problems for him, especially early on, but he can fight for 15 minutes as well. Just look to that Contender Series fight. But I do think that Ronaldo Rodriguez is just more reliable overall. He's a resourceful guy. I think he showed it in his 2 UFC victories so far. Scratch and clawed for a really tight decision over O'Day Osborne, but that was after being hurt as badly as he's ever been hurt. He was nearly knocked out and then nearly choked out, and really had a lot of shit going wrong early, and then he was able to battle his way back to a victory. And against Dennis Bondar, same thing. I mean, he wasn't badly hurt, but Dennis Bondar was all over him. A bunch of right hands right into takedowns. He looked fucking awesome. And Ronaldo outlasted him, tamed him, and then took over and got him out of there with a second left with a rear naked choke. And he's just been a really resourceful guy. His 1 loss in the last, 7 years has been a decision to Jerome Rivera. He kind of came and went in the UFC, but he was in the UFC. That was on the Contender Series, that fight. And I'll tell you, it really could have gone either way. Could have gone the other way, certainly. But yeah, Ronaldo, he's still just 25 years old. He's got a wealth of experience, and he's got a bunch of great traits going for him. And I think he'll be able to win this fight. I've got him winning by submission, but I've got him being a half step behind on the feet. Hopefully I'm wrong about that to begin with. But yeah, no doubt the pick is Ronaldo Rodriguez, and I've already bet on him, and maybe I'll bet on him some more. I'm a jerk off. Next up, we have Kelvin Gastelum versus Joe Pyfer in the co-main event. My prediction here is Pyfer wins by decision. Having said that, I've already bet on Kelvin Gastelum. Yeah, I bet on Kelvin. He had better odds. He was at plus 410 or something like that. Now he's plus 250, 260. I'm not trying to be a dick about it. I'm just telling you, I was tempted to put a small bet on him. But yeah, I definitely, with a gun to my head, would be picking Joe Pyfer to win. I think Pyfer would win this fight by decision. I think he's the healthy athlete at 28 years old. I think he hits harder than Kelvin. And I think he's the big natural middleweight guy who is disciplined and will be in tip-top shape here. But of course, Pyfer, he's 13-3. He's been defeated before. 1 loss was a TKO due to doctor stoppage when he posted on a slam against Dustin Stoltzfus. So it doesn't really count unless it happens again. But his other 2 losses, one being a 5-round decision and one being a 2nd-round submission, you could both attribute to cardio. He got tapped out against Jonathan Potty, who got him out of there with a guillotine choke. That guy's more of a brawler, but in a sloppy fight, he got him out of there with a guillotine after fatiguing Joe. And Jack Hermanson didn't really beat him to fatigue, but he definitely outlasted Joe Pyfer. He dropped the first 2 rounds and then took over the fight, and Joe was just sitting there being chopped down and neutralized. But he did look tough in defeat. I'll give him that. But yeah, I do think here Joe Pyfer will be at a speed disadvantage against Kelvin Gastelum. I think Kelvin will move faster, especially being the natural welterweight that he is. But I don't think Kelvin's going to be able to make it work for him. I don't think he's going to be able to get in on takedowns and bulldoze Joe Pyfer, although it'd be really good for him if he could mix it up and hit those takedowns. And on the feet, I don't think that speed advantage is going to win him the points battle or turn the fight around with any big moments. I think the big moments will belong to Pyfer, and I also think Pyfer wins the points battle. I think he just hits harder, his punches and kicks, and he's going to be the one beating up Kelvin over the course of 15 minutes. And this is a 15-minute fight, by the way. Would be interesting if it was 25 minutes. Some co-main events are, but this is a 15-minute fight. And yeah, I think Kelvin Gastelum can definitely manage himself for 15 minutes, even if he comes in shit shape. But I still think, gun to my head, Joe Pyfer wins this fight. I think he's the more likely guy to get on top. He's the bigger physical force in there, I think. And I think he's the bigger physical force striking-wise, too. And he just gets the better of Kelvin on points. Kelvin's never been knocked out. He's tough as all fuck. The closest anyone's ever come is probably Israel Adesanya. It's definitely Adesanya. And Kelvin still didn't go down. He's been submitted a few times, but and look, that is possible. Joe Pyfer, if he gets Kelvin tired and gets on top of him, he could duplicate the success of Chris Weidman, perhaps. He got an arm triangle over Abdul Razak Al Hassan last year. But I still think a decision is far and away the path to victory for Joe Pyfer, considering Kelvin's losses. And that is the prediction. So yeah, Pyfer wins by decision is the pick. And I'll wait for the props to drop to see if there's anything worth betting on the Joe. Next up, we have Markel Mederos versus Austin Hubbard. My prediction for this fight is Austin Hubbard wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by decision. And the basis for the prediction is, first of all, I think he's got a really good chin, which should keep him safe against Markel Mederos. And secondly, I think Austin Hubbard will be bringing the pressure. I think he'll be in Markel Mederos' face and bringing a high volume. I'm not sure if he's going to match or exceed the strikes of Markel Mederos, but I know he's going to try. He's going to bring the pressure. And I also think, thirdly, he's been rounding out his game. He's definitely not the best wrestler overall, Austin Hubbard, but he's shown he can take guys down at the UFC level. And he's been taking down everybody as of late, aside from Alexander Hernandez. But here I think against Markel Mederos, who's still an inexperienced fighter, relatively, Austin Hubbard will be able to find a way to win. Snatch 2 rounds. Austin Hubbard, he may not be the most reliable point fighter, but he's a solid point fighter. He can go 15 hard minutes. Again, he's really fucking durable. I mean, he can be submitted, but that's a thing too. Markel Mederos isn't likely to go through Austin Hubbard in any way on the ground. I mean, these guys can both grapple, sure, but I think Austin Hubbard will be the one looking to score the points there, and that's what I think will happen there. I'd be surprised if either guy won this fight by submission or even some sort of ground and pound. But Austin Hubbard's got more losses, yeah. Never been knocked out. He's been submitted a few times, but yeah, he's got a 16-8 record. It's not too pretty, but he's been in the UFC a few times now for two different stints, and I think he's still pretty sharp as an athlete, and no doubt he's durable. And I'm picking him with twice the experience to find a way to win and snatch 2 rounds. Markel Mederos, he's got 1 loss as a pro, and it's a split decision. It's the only fight I can't fucking see. He lost to this guy, Santiago Guzman. Split decision, so he wasn't dominated, I'm assuming. But yeah, I can see every fight on that card, but not that fight. It's the first prelim, and there's no information on it. I've tried to read play-by-play blogs and fucking things and whatever. Nothing. But anyway, he was defeated as an amateur a few times, and one of them is kind of pertinent. He was knocked out. maybe it's not too pertinent here because I don't think Hubbard is likely to knock him out. But he was clipped with a punch on the amateur scene and never recovered and was teed off on against the cage, and the fight was stopped. So just know it happened once. It can happen again. But yeah, I do think Austin Hubbard's primary path to victory is a decision here, even though I haven't seen Mederos lose too much. But I do think his primary path to victory is out hustling him, and that's what I'm predicting will happen. I do think Mederos has the better single punch with his right hand, and he uses it well from both stances as the lead hook. It's a sharp punch of his as well. I think he's got some really good calf kicks as well, but I think Austin Hubbard will be in his face. I think he'll be crowding those kicks, bringing pressure, and again, mixing things up, making this a physical battle and trying to take him to the mat. So expect it to be close, even if I'm wrong, but the pick is Austin Hubbard. It definitely warrants a bet. I have to say that because I've already bet on him. But I will wait for the whole over under plus points shit to drop because yeah, I do expect this one to go long. And in the main event of the evening, we have Brandon Moreno versus Steve Erceg. My prediction for this fight is Brandon Moreno wins, and I'll go with him winning by decision. That is definitely the prediction here. I think Steve Erceg is a tough match for him. I think he's a match for him on the feet and on the ground with his skills. But I think Brandon Moreno has the edge with strength and physicality and wrestling and control time, whether it's on the ground or against the cage in the clinch. And that's the basis for picking Brandon Moreno here. But yeah, Steve Erceg, he was knocked out in his last fight against Kai Kara France. He was getting a little too comfortable in the pocket, ready to counter. And he may have changed his style here. He may not be the same fighter he was in his last fight because he did pay for it in a big way. But historically, he's been really comfortable on the feet, really tough, first of all, tough to get out of there, but really technical and sharp. And on the ground, he's even better on the ground, even though I don't think he's going to be much of a grappler, as much of a striker in the UFC, because physicality and wrestling and grappling and all that shit. But I do think Brandon Moreno needs to learn from that loss against Brandon Royval. Brandon Royval, which the fight was really close. I revisited the fight. Really could have gone either way. And I thought Moreno gave one hell of an effort in round 5 when the fight looked like it was getting away from him completely. But he did still let Brandon Royval win that points battle, rack up the volume. He's got very diverse, weird striking, Royval. But yeah, Moreno was a little flustered, I think, and probably a bit tired, but not like he was fatigued or anything. Again, he pushed hard in round 5. But yeah, he can't let the fight slip away against Steve Erceg. I think he knows he has physical advantages over Erceg, and it's not all just wrestling and hugging, by the way. Brandon Moreno is a very dangerous submission artist. Very fucking dangerous. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was the first guy to submit Steve Erceg. I think if you get too careless with Brandon Moreno anywhere near your neck, he can make you pay for it. I always go back to that Dustin Ortiz fight, or even his debut against the guillotine over Louis Smolka, where the Ultimate Fighter season was still going on, and Brandon Moreno was eliminated as the 16th seed. And in the middle of that tournament being eliminated, he comes in the UFC and beats Louis Smolka. But yeah, I do think Moreno is really dangerous on the ground, more than he is on the feet, but he's still dangerous on the feet. He is the guy who knocked out the guy that knocked out Steve Erceg. He got Kai Kara France with the liver kick and took him out. So yeah, Brandon Moreno, I'm picking him to win by decision, but he's as dangerous as he is durable. And I think, this could be a very interesting fight. I'd love to see them grappling. Not clinch grinding, but actually grappling and going for shit on the ground. I think it'll be really entertaining. Moreno's a killer down there. And yeah, I know he was tapped against Alexandre Pantoja in an exhibition fight on The Ultimate Fighter, which I just mentioned. But I think he gets the first knockout or first submission against Steve Erceg. That's just my estimation of Brandon Moreno's skills and his overall durability. But still, I am picking him to win by decision, and I do think it will be a relatively close fight. I'm not relying on the crowd, though. I do think Moreno will outpoint Steve Erceg, but I think he'll do so by making this a more of a boring fight. And I think both guys are ready to go for 25 minutes, but I've got Brandon Moreno outgrinding Steve Erceg. Moreno is the pick. I've already bet on Moreno, and we'll see what else happens when all the props drop. But yeah, I'm going with Moreno. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my